Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well. Can you please raise your hands if you can hear me? Okay, good. Okay, let's just wait a minute or two because I see that there are still learners joining us before we start. Okay, I think we can start. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all doing well under the lockdown circumstances. I'm Ilse Stickling. I'm the Education Specialist for History and Geography at IMPOC. So just a few things before we start. If you are struggling to hear me, please make sure that your audio is on and that your speaker's volume is turned up. Then during the session, you will be automatically be muted. Then this is again a full hour session. So please, if you have any questions, that you type the questions in the question box and also just leave your email address. Then on the right-hand side of the screen, you can download the documents. For the Afrikaans learners, there's also the Afrikaans PowerPoint presentation that you can download and follow on the Afrikaans. If you experience any problems with downloading the documents, you can just also leave me your email address so that we can send you this a bit later on. And then during the session, if we experience any technical difficulties or so forth, you might also hear the voice of my colleague, Charlene Kraus, that is assisting me with the organizing of this webinar. Okay, so let's start. So during this session, I'm going to talk to you about source-based skills development, and towards the end, we are going to focus a bit on essay writing skills. Now, history is not just about learning the content, it is also about how to answer certain questions in history, because sometimes the questions can be very tricky and you need to be able to have the skills to know exactly how to answer the questions for the marks that you need to receive. Okay, so remember in all question papers, you have a source-based section with source-based questions, and then you also have an essay section. So in all examinations, you are required to answer any 3 of the 6 questions, either 2 source-based and 1 essay, or 2 essays and 1 source-based, depending on your strengths. You are either good with source-based, then answer rather 2 source-based and 1 essay. If you are very good with essay writing, rather write 2 essays and 1 source-based question. Okay, so let's start with usefulness versus reliability. And I put the verses there because this is one of the things that confuses a lot of learners, is that they get confused between the terms of usefulness and reliability. So you need to know the difference when we ask usefulness and when we ask reliability. So first we are going to focus on the usefulness of sources. Okay. Now, typical questions that you might get in a question paper. The first one there says, explain the usefulness of the source to a historian studying the following, whatever the topic is. Okay. So verduidelik die bruikbaarheid van die bron vir 'n geskiedkundige wat die volgende bestudeer, wat ook al die onderwerp is. So we can ask you a simple question like explain the usefulness. Why is the source useful? Or we can make it more tricky and we can ask you, to what extent is the source useful to a historian studying whatever? Now this means you need to write it is useful to a lesser extent or it is useful to a greater extent. Okay. So tot watter mate is die bron bruikbaar vir 'n geskiedkundige wat die volgende bestudeer? So dis of tot 'n mindere mate bruikbaar of dis tot 'n meerdere mate bruikbaar. Right. So those are basically the two usefulness type of questions that you can get in a question paper. Now, what is usefulness? How do we determine usefulness of a source? A source is useful when you can use the source for the purpose of your study. So say, for example, you are studying the prisoner of war camps during World War II, but the book that you have in front of you is about the French Revolution. So is that source going to be useful to your study? Obviously not, because you don't want to know about the French Revolution. You are currently studying the POW camps of World War II. So no, the source will definitely not be useful. Right. So now in a question paper, we can ask you, explain the usefulness of the source to whatever the purpose of your study is. So you will need to explain the usefulness of the source with relevant examples from the sources that you have used. For example, the source is useful in explaining mental abuse suffered by captives in POW camps, as well as the brutality of camp administration and management. So in this question, the mark allocation is 2 times 2 equals 4. So that means you need to explain why the source is useful in 2 separate explanations for the full marks of 4 marks. Okay. So what is also very important is that you need to write it is useful, okay, because, and then you give 2 different explanations. To help you with these explanations in a source-based question, you can also write the answers in bullet point format so that you make sure you have 2 different explanations and that you're not just elaborating on one or more aspects in your answer. Okay, so usefulness of sources continue. To what extent is the source useful? So when you read the information in the source and it's not giving you a lot of information to answer your question, it's very limited or it only focuses on one aspect and you are interested in more information, you can answer to a lesser extent. And then you need to give your motivation of why you say it is to a lesser extent. So now you can elaborate and say, but this source only focuses on this part of POW camps. The information is very limited and it focuses only on one aspect. Okay, just make sure that you write enough explanations for the amount of marks. Then on the other side, you can write to a greater extent. In other words, there's a lot of factual content in the source. It helps you a lot in giving you the answers that you need. There's a lot of information. It's very helpful. There's extended facts. So you can actually use the source to a great extent. Okay. So in an answer like this, to what extent, you have to write first to a lesser extent or to a greater extent. And as long as you can motivate your answer effectively, it actually does not matter which way you actually go, to a lesser or a greater extent. But in some questions, sorry, it will obviously be very evident that it is to a lesser extent or to a greater extent. Now, usefulness still continuing. For 2 times 2 equals 4 marks. you will have to specify to a lesser extent or to a greater extent and explain your two reasons. Okay. Now, grade 11s, this is very, very important, so you should take note of this. When we ask you to what extent is the source useful, is it reliable, was this person's actions justified or not, if we ask you yes or no, you have to write those words. Although you don't receive marks for those words, you only receive marks for the explanations or the motivations. But remember, the marker does not want to guess from your explanations what your argument is. That is why you need to specify to a lesser extent, to a greater extent. Yes, no, agree, disagree, justified or not justified, so that the marker can easily mark your motivations. Because if you don't write that, then obviously the marker will struggle to give you the marks because they don't know what side of the argument you are going for, right? So please make sure that you write these keywords before you write your explanations. And then for 2 times 2 marks equals 4, please make sure that you write 2 different motivations. Do not elaborate on one motivation or one reason and think that you are going to get a full 4 marks. Okay. Again, you can use bullet points in these answers just to make sure that you focus on 2 separate aspects during these questions. Okay, now reliability of sources. Think about friendship. Think about your best friend. Can you rely on your best friend, for example? So reliability has a lot to do with trustworthiness. Can you trust the source to give you the correct information? So in Afrikaans, reliability is die betroubaarheid van bronne. Dink aan jou beste vriend of vriendin, byvoorbeeld, is jou vriend of vriendin betroubaar? Kan jy hierdie persoon vertrou? En dit is dieselfde met bronne in geskiedenis. Can you trust the source to give you the correct information? So you can write either yes, it's reliable, or no, it is not reliable. Okay, now how can we determine reliability? Because it's quite difficult to determine the reliability of sources. But there is a number of ways that we can do that. Okay, the first one is to compare sources with one another. Is the information the same as information in other sources? So say, for example, you have sources 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, right? Does the information in some of these sources correspond with one another? Does it give the same facts? So if it gives the same facts, you can say, yes, the source is reliable because the information is also stated in other sources. For example, if you do research on the internet, you cannot just go to the first website and write down that information because anyone can put anything on a website. It's not to say that it is reliable information. So when you do research for tasks and so forth, it is always advisable to go more than one website and to actually compare the factual information with one another. For example, a lot of us immediately start to use Wikipedia, but on Wikipedia websites, there's also a box in which they say that if you have other information or if the facts are not correct or so forth, that you actually inform them about that or that you can add information. So they also acknowledge that some of the information might not be based on actual facts or so forth, although they are trying their best. So it's always important to determine the trustworthiness of a source, to go to other sources just to compare the facts, to see that the facts in this source also correspond with facts in another source as well. So it doesn't matter for which subject you do research for on the internet, always use more than one source and make comparisons to see if the facts are the same. Then a second way is to look at the author of the source, okay, the writer of the source. Is the source biased or objective? Okay, So vir die Afrikaanse mense, jy kan tweedens gaan kyk na die outeur van die bron, die skrywer van die bron. Bias beteken die persoon is eensydig. Hy het sy eie opinie oor iets. Hy is nie objektief nie. Met ander woorde, hy vat nie albei kante van 'n storie nie. Hy fokus net op sy kant van 'n storie. Right. So a biased author is someone who focuses on his own opinion. Someone who is one-sided in his perspective. And in history, it is very important that we use objective information and authors that are objective. In other words, they can tell the history from all perspectives. They stick with facts. They don't really work with opinions of people. Opinions of people, yes, can be helpful in trying to understand what people felt like. For example, how the prisoners felt like during the session, during the POW camps and so forth, that we can assist them, right? But obviously, from historical side, we need to be objective and look at all sides, right? Now, a historian is someone who can think objective versus someone who has a strong one-sided opinion about something. So always make sure that your author is someone trustworthy. Is it a historian? Does it come from a book that's based on research? Or is it a political person with his own agenda? So always look at those type of things. Then another thing you can look at is a date, right? So please make sure that you know what happened on that specific date in history so that you can compare the events in the source with the date and compare that to say that, but did this really happen on this specific date? Say, for example, they say to you that Pearl Harbor was attacked on the 4th of July, 1945. Then it's not reliable because Pearl Harbor was attacked on the 7th of December, 1941. So please make sure that you know your dates very well, that you know the events that happened on that specific date, and that, again, you remain with objective accounts of what happened and not one-sided accounts of what happened. And that makes a source reliable. In other words, you can trust the information in the source. I just want to remind you that if you have any questions, that you please write it within the question box, and that you also please write me your email address so that after the session I can answer your questions. Okay, then let's look at bias. What is bias? Bias is a one-sided information. You can see that picture there. It's all about that specific guy, right? So it's all about someone's opinion. Now, it's one-sided information. So, for example, you get into a car accident. You will probably have a different opinion of what happened than the other driver. Bystanders that actually witnessed the accident, everyone will have a different opinion of what happened. So it is a source that can be useful, but it's not trustworthy, right? So in history, we also get a lot of bias, one-sided information. A very prominent example of this that you have used now for senior phase as well going onwards is propaganda. Okay. Now, during wartime, especially, propaganda was used widely to persuade people to believe in something, to promote one side, to get people to do things, to brainwash people, to actually promote an idea. So in many cases in wartime propaganda, it was used to make the other side look bad. So, for example, a poster where Britain actually portrays Germany as a monster. It is exaggerated information maybe on the poster and so forth, but it's one-sided. It is what the British views are. So one-sided information or biased information is mostly based on a person's opinion. It's based on personal feelings or own experiences of a person, right? It's the same as in your normal life as well. Sometimes you have your own feelings about something, you have your own experiences about something. It's not always trustworthy, but that is how you feel at the moment. And many of us have told stories before where we actually exaggerate something, or if we think about oral history, where a legend is being told over from one generation to the next, it actually gets on added information until it actually becomes untrustworthy. It's not the original version of the story, right? Then biased information cannot be reliable, but it can be useful. Okay, so remember that. That's very important. You can still use someone's diary, like the diary of Anne Frank, to actually know what people felt like during the Second World War, say, for example, in a concentration camp. It can be useful, but it's not reliable always, because most of the information is from personal feelings, and it's not to say that it is trustworthy, right? Now, a challenge for you is to think about the following movies. I don't know if you've watched the movies, but the first one is Pearl Harbor. Now, Pearl Harbor is basically from the American perspective of the bombing of Pearl Harbor in the Pacific Ocean, the Navy fleet situated there, right, in 1941. Now I say that versus the movie of Letters from Iwo Jima. If you watch Pearl Harbor, you will actually feel very sorry for the Americans. You will have a lot of sympathy with them, even empathy with them. But then on the other side, if you watch Letters from Iwo Jima, you will actually start to feel sympathy or empathy for the Japanese, because many of these soldiers, like the kamikaze, were selected by the emperor to actually be trained as suicide fighter pilots, and they were scared and they had no other option, because it's all about honor for the empire as well as honor in your family, right? And you start to get a different perspective that yes, Pearl Harbor was really bad, but for some of the Japanese, it was also bad. And war is not a nice thing on either side. And it's not as romantic as it is portrayed in the movies and so forth. Then you can have another movie, for example, Midway. It was recently there. I don't know if you've seen Midway, but Midway actually includes a lot of both perspectives, where you can actually view what some of the Japanese opinions were and what the Americans' opinions were, and so forth. So in history, it is very important that we remain objective, take factual content from both sides, and actually develop an objective perspective of history, remain with facts. As historians, we do not actually want to write history from a one-sided perspective, but we want to involve all sides in such a way that we give the correct facts through to people. Okay, let's look at paragraph writing. Now, this is also where a lot of you lose marks. Okay, the reasons. Many of you still write separate sentences and not a paragraph. People, you have to write a coherent paragraph and not separate sentences. Okay. So it's very important that you also create a flow of information within your paragraph. Pay attention to proper sentence construction, the correct spelling, and the use of punctuation marks in the right places. Some of the paragraphs are extremely difficult to mark because it's extremely difficult to read, because many learners don't use capital letters at the beginning of a sentence. They don't use a full stop at the end of a sentence. So it's very difficult to read a paragraph where you cannot see the start of sentences and the end of sentences. Some of the spelling is extremely poor when it comes to grade 10 to 12. Right, and it's one of the aspects that you need to focus on, because remember, in it, the FET phase, grade 10 to 12, you are already developing your professional image. Because in 3 years' time, on your grade, you are obviously going to go to university, you are going to go to the technicon, or you are going into the workplace or whatever. And then obviously your professional image is also going to be in your writing. Remember that on a computer there's spell check. There are dictionaries available and so forth. If you don't know the spelling, it's time to learn the spelling of words. Do not always count on something. You know, it's really bad when people have all of these degrees behind their names, but when they write professional documents and so forth, there's a lot of mistakes on those documents, because that gives an unprofessional image of a very professional, well-educated person. So now is the time to actually start practicing all of those things. Then also, many times you write very, very short paragraphs. Some of you leave out the paragraph questions and you throw away 8 marks. Okay. So please aim for at least 15-line paragraphs when you write a paragraph. That is the maximum amount of lines for a paragraph in history. Okay. So in a paragraph of 15 lines, you have enough space actually to focus on various facts and to make sure that you put a lot of information into that paragraph so that you can at least get to a high level 2 or a level 3 mark for your paragraph. Unfortunately, a lot of learners remain within a level 1 mark for a paragraph when we use the rubric. Okay, and those are skills that you need to develop. Okay, when you write a paragraph, it is very important that you use all the relevant sources in the source-based question and your own knowledge. So in other words, the information that you've studied from the textbook, right? Refer to the sources in your paragraph. So the marker actually wants to see that you have used the sources and that you have also brought in your own knowledge that was not mentioned in the sources in the paragraph, that you actually have the knowledge to write a coherent paragraph. Okay. Now I've highlighted the relevant sources because now you have mostly 4 sources in one source-based question. But in a paragraph, maybe the information in source 1C is irrelevant to the paragraph question. So you're not going to use the information in source 1C because it's not going to help you to write the paragraph on the question being asked. Okay, so only use the relevant sources. For example, this is a question, use the sources and your knowledge to write a paragraph. Usually we will put there of approximately 15 lines on Rasputin's influence on the Romanovs. Okay, now I give you an example there. My first sentence, Rasputin was best known for his role as mystical advisor to Tsar Nicholas of Russia. And then I put in brackets source 1A. Because now the marker can actually see that I have used the sources, the relevant sources. The next sentence, he entered the court of Tsar Nicholas II because of his alleged healing abilities, source 1B. So I put the source in brackets. The marker can see I used the sources. But now I also need to put in my own information in this paragraph. Empress Alexandra believed that Rasputin could heal their son and his influence at the time was limited. So this is now my own knowledge. You don't have to write there my own knowledge in brackets. You only have to refer to the sources in brackets. So your own knowledge is just a sentence without any reference to a specific source. Okay. So then this paragraph needs to continue over about 15 lines to make sure that you have various facts, that you've effectively used the sources. And remember that a lot of you actually elaborate on 1 or 2 things and you write 15 lines, but you don't actually incorporate a lot of different facts. You only elaborate on 1 or 2 things. And although it is 15 lines, you're still going to get a mark in a level 1 content in the rubric. So please make sure that you use various facts, you use the various sources, and you put in your own information as well in the paragraph. Then also very important, okay, many of you do not prepare for your essays, and then you use the information in the source-based section in the sources to write your essays. You are not allowed to do that, okay? So please make sure that you prepare yourselves for your essays, that you know the content for your essays very well. Remember, you do have the exam guideline that basically gives you the broad topics of your essays and so forth. And unfortunately, history is a lot of work that you need to work through and so forth. But please do not use the source information in the source-based section for your essays because you will then not get marks for your essays as such, right? So please refrain from doing that. Then also very important when it comes to source-based questions is that you look at your mark allocation, right? So many times you will see a very basic mark. 1 times 1 equals 1. So this means we actually just want one short, brief answer. So this can be name or identify. So it's a very short answer for 1 mark. Okay. So, julle moet asseblief kyk na julle puntetoekenning dat julle nie onnodig punte weggooi nie. Die eerste tipe punt wat ons kry is 'n 1 maal 1 is gelyk aan 1 en hierso soek ons net 'n baie kort antwoord vir 1 punt. Okay. Then we can also give you a mark like this, mark allocation, 1 times 2 equals 2. Now this means it's not just one brief answer that you need to give for 1 mark, but it's also not a long answer that you need to give. It's just one thing that you need to properly explain. So this can be a definition, for example, define a Cold War, for example. Explain briefly what happened between the two superpowers regarding the arms race. Briefly discuss. In other words, it's a short explanation or it is a definition for 2 marks. So it's one thing that you need to explain for 2 marks. So please don't write only one aspect and don't write more than that. Okay, mark allocation continue. Then we also get marks like 3 times 1. 2 times 1 equals 2, 4 times 1 equals 4. So this is basically 3 things for 1 mark, 2 things for 1 mark, 4 things for 1 mark. So this would be typically list 3 causes of the French Revolution. Name 2 things in the source that determines whatever. Identify 4 reasons in the source for this. Okay, so then you just briefly, in bullet point format, underneath each other, can just name those 3 things or list those 3 things. Name those 2 things or identify those 4 things for that type of marks. Okay, then a very important mark allocation in the longer type questions is the 2 times 2 equals 4. And this is where a lot of you actually throw away marks. So please pay attention to this one. It's 2 aspects that need to be explained. Sometimes what you do is you make these 2 bullet points and you actually write one thing in both bullet points and you only get 2 marks. Okay. Make sure that there are 2 different things in these bullet points, especially when it comes to comparing sources. Okay. So for example, you need to let's use this question. How does source 1A support source 1C? Now you need to write for the first 2 marks. Source 1A mentions that propaganda was widely used during World War I, and source 1C is a propaganda poster from the First World War. So there's your first comparison. Now you need to make a second comparison for 4 marks. Source 1A also identifies the various propaganda techniques that were used to make the enemy look bad, And then in source 1C, the poster actually portrays the enemy as a vicious monster. So now you actually made 2 distinct comparisons for 4 marks. A lot of you will write in the first bullet point, source 1A, and then in the second bullet point, source 1B, this and that, right? And then we can actually only give you 2 marks because it's one comparison that you made. Make sure that you make 2 separate comparisons for 4 marks. The same with explanation, the same with discuss, analyze, evaluate. Make sure that in your bullet points, you write 2 distinct answers, different answers, that still answers the question, that you do not elaborate on one aspect for 4 marks. Okay, then essay writing basics, also very important. Okay, now first up, in your instructions, in your question paper, your exam papers, it will state the amount of pages that you need to write in your essay. Right, so by die instruksies van jou opstelle, of van jou vraestelle, sal jy sien die aantal bladsye wat jy moet skryf in jou opstelle. Now for grade 10, the amount of pages that learners must write for an essay is 2 pages, and then grade 11 and 12, it is about 3 pages that you need to write. Okay, so now I'm going to give you some secrets to essay writing. If you write less than these pages, as jy minder as hierdie bladsye skryf, then it gives the marker the image of the learner has limited knowledge, the learner did not learn effectively, the learner does not really know what he's writing about, or so forth. So stick at least to the page requirements. 3 pages in grade 11 and 12. Right. Now also please look at your handwriting, the size of your handwriting. If you have a small to a medium size handwriting, then obviously 3 pages is enough. But if you know you have a large handwriting, you will need to go over 3 pages, but not more than 5 pages. Okay, because if you now go more than 5 pages, you give the marker the image of the learner struggles to highlight important facts and integrate facts in an essay format. Overall, the learner cannot come to the point. Okay, so very, very important. Look at the size of your handwriting. Never write less than the indicated pages in the instructions, and never go more than 5 pages, because it really gives the impression this learner knows a lot but just cannot come to the point. Okay, he struggles with the argument, he struggles with the evaluation, he doesn't know how to integrate the facts to actually just make the argument. Then also, please avoid irrelevant information. Stick to the question. Very, very, very important. Dit is baie belangrik dat jy bly by die vraag, dat jy nie afwyk van die vraag af nie, want dit gaan gemerk word as irrelevante inligting en dit veroorsaak dat jy baie punte gaan verloor in die einde van die dag. So read the whole question and not just part of the question. A lot of us are guilty about this, that we actually just catch 1 or 2 words and we start to write the answer and we think that this was the question. And then later on, you actually read the full question and you think, oh my word, what did I just write? I did not focus on this because I did not actually read the full question. I only focused on 1 or 2 things in the question. So it is very important that when you write your essay, that you first read your question very carefully and you sit for a minute or 2 and you just reflect on the question. Think about what the question is actually asking you. It is very, very important that you do that. Okay, especially in grade 11 and 12, there might be higher order cognitive thinking levels that we are incorporating. And this actually determines that you need to reflect on the question to actually try to determine what higher order cognitive thinking skills you need to incorporate in your essay. Okay. Then also, please look for dates or a time frame in your question. Now, say for example, we need you to write an essay on the Cold War, but we ask you to explain the political situation in Eastern Europe between 1970 and 1989. But now you start to write from the end of World War II, where the Cold War started in 1945, and you continue up to 1989. So all that information from 1945 to 1970 will be irrelevant. It will not be considered in your essay for marking. So when there is a date, please make sure that you focus on the facts and the things that actually happened within that date, that you do not lose marks there. Okay. So asseblief mense, kyk ook na datums, dat wanneer ons vir jou vra, bespreek die politiese gebeure wat plaasgevind het in die Koue Oorlog tussen 1971 en 1989, dat jy nie al begin skryf van 1945 af nie, want alle inligting van 1945 tot 1970 gaan irrelevant wees en jy gaan nie punte daarvoor kry nie. So vermy dit asseblief. Bly by die vraag, bly by die datums as daar vir jou datums in 'n vraag gegee word. So dit is verskriklik belangrik dat jy fokus op jou vraag, dat jy dit baie mooi deurlees en dat jy eintlik net vir 'n rukkie sit en reflekteer oor die vraag. Dink baie mooi wat die vraag vir jou vra. Reg. Okay. Then the last bullet point there is to use your time available effectively. Okay. Now, a few years ago, I have invigilated examinations at an impact center. And one of the things I noticed is that as soon as the learners are finished writing the paper, they leave the venue. Right. So many of them are extremely hasty. They write very quickly. And if it is a 3-hour examination, they are finished within the first 40 minutes and they leave the venue. Right. There's a reason why we give you 3 hours per history paper. Remember, a source-based question counts 50 marks. You need to answer 3 questions, 50 marks each, for a total of 150 marks. You cannot answer effectively in 40 minutes. Okay, so you need to use the time that is available, especially when it comes to essay writing, right? Do not throw away marks because you get anxious because 3/4 of the learners are already out of the venue and you now suddenly feel that there's something wrong with you because you are still writing. You actually need to use that time because it is your marks, it is your future, right? So you need to focus on the time and please use that effectively. I also want to advise you guys to do a brief mind map planning before you actually start to write your essay in an examination. You will not get penalized for planning or so forth in the essay. Just do a brief mind map, a little cloud in the middle to say this is the topic of the essay. Then the first leg of the mind map says the introduction, and then you just put a few keywords, what you're going to put in the introduction. The second leg going out of the cloud is paragraph 1, and you're going to focus on this in paragraph 1. Now, this is also very helpful because sometimes if you don't plan your essay beforehand, you actually write the essay, and when it's finished, when you read through the essay, you actually start to realize, oh my word, I actually forgot to put this in, and I actually wanted to say this. This is very important. I don't know where to put this in now because there's no space. Now, if you plan your essay and you put a brief mind map in, this will actually avoid you from leaving out important information. And remember again, you've got 1 hour per essay question. Use it wisely. Use the full time that you have available. Right. Also very important in essay writing skills is that in history essays, there are no subheadings. There are no bullet points and there are no numbering in history essays. Now, the same with research tasks, where you need to write an index, but you need to write an essay. Now, how are you going to compile the index, for example? You don't need subheadings to actually compile an index. You can just write in the index number 1, introduction is on page 1. In other words, you wrote the introduction on page 1. Number 2, the 100 flowers wall or something like that, where you can just actually focus on that issue is discussed on page 1, and you put that in your index. So again, you do not need subheadings for an index. It's just where the information appears in that specific essay, right? So please, maybe in life orientation and other subjects, you can use subheadings and bullet points or numbering and so forth, but in history, you are not allowed to use those things. All right. Then you must have an introduction paragraph. This can be shorter than the rest of your paragraphs. So here you can at least aim for 8 lines, where you introduce the marker or the reader of your essay to your argument or to the topic of the essay that you are writing. And the secret to a good introduction is actually to create tension in your introduction, so that the marker actually becomes so curious that he or she can't wait to read the rest of your essay. So an introduction paragraph is actually very, very important to create that feeling of, I actually want to read this. I'm sure many of you have read novels and books and so forth, and you actually turn to the back cover of the book and you immediately think, this book is going to be boring, I'm not going to read it. Or you pick up the back side of the book and you read it and you think, oh, wow, I'm curious, I want to read this book. It sounds very interesting. Now, the same with the introduction of your essay. Make it interesting. Okay, try to find that aspect that can actually create that curiosity with the marker. I want to read the rest of this essay. Then your essay must have a body with paragraphs, and please remember that you need to leave lines open between paragraphs. Sometimes we still receive essays in grade 11 and 12 and there are no paragraphs. It's just one page fully written. And you are going to lose a lot of marks on presentation. And remember, when we use the marking rubric for essay, we work on a cross-marking rubric. In other words, your content can be very well, but if your presentation is not well, we can only give you the lowest mark of the content where it crosses with the presentation. Okay, so be very careful. Your format of your essay is just as important as the content of your essay. Please also write proper paragraphs with good sentence construction, good spelling, and the use of punctuation marks. Remember again, this is your professional image. A history paper is scientific. History is a science. It's an academic subject. So you need to make sure that this is professionally written. Again, aim for 10 to 15 line paragraphs. And then this is very important. Okay. Focus on one key point per paragraph. A lot of you push in 10 different facts in one paragraph, and the essay reads very difficult. Many of you don't stay with a chronological order. Your first paragraph is on something that happened in 1989. And then the second paragraph, you jump back to 1971. And then in the third paragraph, you go to the year 2000 or something like that. So remember, in history, you have to keep to a chronological order of events, the first things first, and then the story develops, the history develops according to the dates and the chronological order. But again, to make sure that you effectively deliver an argument in an essay, focus on one key point per paragraph. Explain that key point per paragraph and make sure that that one key point connects to the key point in the next paragraph, that there is a link between the key points, because that is how you are going to create a flow in your essay so that the marker can easily read and follow your essay. Then very important, you also need to write a definite conclusion. Many of you don't write conclusions, okay? So this is also where you lose a lot of marks, because you can also look on the rubric that no conclusion or attempt at a conclusion is at level 1 or 2. So you can have, again, this brilliant essay, but without a conclusion, we have to use the lowest mark where content crosses with presentation. Okay, and you throw away marks. And then you also need to develop the skill of writing a proper conclusion so that we can see you are actually ending off your essay, because sometimes you write conclusions and it just seems like another paragraph because it's a skill that you haven't developed yet. So please try and practice to write a proper conclusion. And here I actually want you to imagine that you are a state prosecutor or an attorney in a court. And this is your very last chance that you can actually convince the judge of your argument. Is the person guilty or is the person not guilty? Right. You can also watch some television programs where court cases are going on to just give you the idea of how these people actually do research to get factual content and then actually put it in such a way that they can defend their argument throughout and actually deliver a good argument. And then again, at the end, in the conclusion, you need to summarize the most important points that you made in your essay, and you need to keep defending your argument. Okay. Then very important also, please avoid I, we, us in an essay. I, we, us in an essay. A lot of times when we mark, for example, apartheid essays, there's a lot of the use of I, we, us, and so forth. Quite frankly, you were not there, right? So you were not in the Second World War, you were not in the Cold War, and so forth. You did not have that specific experience, what the question is about. So please avoid these words. And again, history essays must be objective and not based on personal opinions, right? So please avoid this. Also, try and stay away from primary school essay writing ideas, such as, in this essay I am going to write about, or this essay is about. In this essay I will. It's not very scientific, it's not very objective. Rather use more scientific terminology and sentences like, the statement made is valid because, and then you immediately continue with facts. Or the statement made is invalid, and you immediately state the facts. And overall, then you stay away from your personal opinions and your feelings about the matter, and you stick with the facts that you have learned. Okay. What is also important to take note of is that you can actually go any way of an argument. Okay, in most cases, you can do that. So you can, in an essay, write, this is valid or it's invalid, as long as you can motivate your answer effectively with factual content, right? Sometimes the most surprising essays that you get is the 1 in 40 in a classroom that actually goes the exact opposite as what most learners would write. And they are actually so good in presenting and their factual content that whereas everyone believes that there is no reason for it to be invalid, this person could actually prove that it is invalid due to the facts that he or she used, right? So again, you can go both ways of the argument, just as long as you are able to motivate your facts properly. Then also very important, I don't know if there are tutors also listening in, but a lot of schools, teachers and so forth give essays before an examination to learners, and they say you need to study this essay for the examination. It's very irresponsible. You cannot do that. You can give pre-written essays to learners to actually give them an example of what an essay looks like. But we give you in the history guideline a broad topic that the history essay is going to focus on Eastern Europe, for example. But we can ask you anything within Eastern Europe. It's a very, very broad content. And now you write the pre-studied history essay that someone has given you or that you prepared beforehand without knowing the question. And then most of your essay is totally irrelevant. Okay, it's very important that you note you do not know the question of the essay until you start to write the examination. So rather learn proper essay writing skills, practice that, and learn your content very well. That's the safe way to actually write a proper essay. Okay, and to prepare yourselves for that. In the study guideline that's available on my impact, you will also see that we give you the broad topics for the essays. We can ask you anything within that topic. We can even ask you to focus on a specific time frame or so forth. So please just know all the content. And I've also given you on the study notes on my Impact a website, WikiHow, how to write a history essay that was written by someone who has a master's degree in history. That also helps you just to focus on important skills about essay writing, skills that you need to learn how to develop if you struggle with essay writing. Okay, then finally, remember that history involves a lot of higher order thinking skills. I get a lot of queries from people who say, but I think my daughter or my son's essay was really good. Can you explain to me where he or she lost marks or so forth? And then when you actually read the question, you get the feeling that the learner actually knows the content very well, but there's no higher order thinking skills. Okay, in grade 11 and 12, we actually want you to think and use higher order thinking skills and not just simply discuss facts, right? We need you to analyze facts. We need you to evaluate facts. We need you to critically discuss something and not just discuss facts. We need you to deliver an argument. And again, this is a skill that you need to develop. You need to go do research, and you can Google this. What does critically discuss mean? How does it differ from discuss? What does evaluate mean? What does analyze mean? What does it mean to deliver an argument? And it does not help only to write in your introduction, this statement made was invalid because of this, and now you simply in the rest of the essay discuss facts. You still need to argue throughout your essay and not just mention facts, because then it becomes a discuss essay and not an argumentative essay. So please, guys, this is one aspect that you need to practice and you need to develop. In some textbooks, subjects textbooks as well, there's usually in the front of the textbook or in the back of the textbook descriptions of these words as well, that where they explain to you what does evaluate mean and so forth, but it's widely available on the internet as well, where you can just do research. And you can Google also, especially from universities, historical departments and so forth, what history essays actually look like. And you will start to realize that they are using arguments. they evaluate facts. It's not just a description of events, because in grade 10, 11, and 12, we need you to apply knowledge. We need you to actually think more about something and be able to evaluate or argue and use that more higher order thinking skills. Okay, again, it's not something that easily comes to everyone. It is something that you need to practice and keep on practicing. And if you are at a tutor center and so forth, that the tutors will also help you to develop these skills, right? The second bullet point there, these type of essays involve higher order thinking throughout, not just in the introduction and not just in the conclusion, but throughout the essay. It's not just a mere rewrite of facts that you have learned. It involves much more skill than simply writing a discuss essay. Again, some of you have wonderful essays. You write a lot of content. I can see that you actually know your content, but you lack the skills of delivering an argument. You lack the skills of evaluating facts. Okay, so remember again, history is not just a learning subject, it's an application subject. It is a scientific subject. It actually forces you to think critically about things, to become objective thinkers, and not just to simply believe everything that you see, but to actually try to understand the content from all sides of perspectives and so forth, and develop an argument. Okay, then all claims are supported by factual evidence. Argue your statement based on facts. Remember, in history, avoid your own personal opinions. It doesn't matter if you agree or disagreed with something that happened in the past, okay? That's your personal opinion, but as a historian, it's your responsibility to stick with the facts, to stick with the content. Then also evaluate, analyze those facts throughout. Again, just not in the introduction and in the conclusion, but throughout the history essay. Again, guys, this is practice, practice, practice. Practice makes perfect. Yes. Okay, then this is the end of our session. I hope you have all gained some very valuable information with this. So go through the activities in your textbook, practice source-based questions, see if you can find bias, justified type of questions and so forth, and practice them. Practice some essay writing skills. Look up the meanings of words of higher order cognitive thinking skills, and just try and develop those skills for tests and examinations and tasks and so forth that lies ahead. Again, if you have any questions, please put them in the question box with your email address so that I can give you effective feedback a bit later on. And then if you are not registered with Impact and you are very interested and so forth, you can send an email to info@impact.co.za. If you have other queries that is not content related to history, you are also welcome to send an email to info@impact.co.za. Okay, guys, thank you. I hope you enjoyed this and it was of some value to you. And yes, bye. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye. Dankie, Charlene.